Kola woke up early that morning, even before the sun had fully risen. The sky was still dark, and the street outside was quiet except for the faint sound of a dog barking in the distance. He stretched his arms and yawned, thinking about the busy day ahead at the office. Work had been stressful lately, and he felt that he carried most of the responsibility for the family. In his mind, he believed he worked harder than everyone else in the house. He thought that while he spent hours at the office making money, others spent their time resting or relaxing. That thought had slowly begun to change how he saw his wife, Amina. Amina was already awake. She had gotten up even before Kola, as she often did, to make sure the house was ready for the day. She moved quietly around the kitchen, preparing breakfast while humming a soft tune. The smell of fried eggs and bread soon filled the small house. The floor was already swept, and the living room was neatly arranged. Kola did not see the effort she had put into organizing everything. He only noticed that the house looked neat, and he began to take it for granted. "Good morning," Amina said softly, placing a plate of food on the table. Her smile was gentle, but a small shadow of tiredness crossed her face. Kola muttered a short greeting, too busy thinking about the meetings he had that morning. He did not notice how heavy her steps had become, how the corners of her eyes carried the signs of many sleepless nights spent making sure everything ran smoothly. After breakfast, Amina quickly washed the dishes and hung the clothes that had been drying from the night before. She carried baskets of laundry to the line outside, bending carefully to avoid spilling water. Every movement was careful, almost automatic, like a well-practiced routine. Kola watched her for a moment and then said, "Make sure the house is ready when I get back tonight. I don't want to come home to a mess." He said it casually, not realizing how his words carried weight. Amina nodded quietly and smiled, but inside she felt a small pinch of hurt. She had been managing everything already, and now it felt as though her efforts were invisible. Kola left for work, locking the door behind him. He walked down the street with a brisk pace, thinking about the tasks he had to complete. He believed that earning money for the family made him the most important person in the house. In his mind, he was the provider, and that justified his attitude. He thought that Amina should naturally handle the home chores without complaint because that was her role. He never considered how much energy it took for her to manage the house day after day while also supporting him emotionally. Amina stayed behind, quietly continuing her work. She watered the plants on the porch, noticing how some leaves were dry and some flowers needed more attention. She swept the floor again, not because it was necessary but because she liked things tidy. She took a moment to glance around the living room and sighed softly. The house looked perfect, clean and organized, but her body ached from the constant work. Sometimes she wished she could sit down and rest, but she never let herself for long. She had learned long ago that rest would come later, after the chores, after making sure the family was comfortable. Her sacrifice had become invisible to the man she loved most. As the morning passed, Amina moved from one task to another. She checked the refrigerator and planned lunch. She washed more clothes, folded them neatly, and organized the bedroom. She even polished the small wooden table where they ate, making sure it shined in the sunlight that now streamed through the windows. Each movement was careful, almost graceful, but exhausting. Her hands ached, her back ached, and yet she pushed through without complaint. She had grown used to putting everyone else's needs before her own. It was a habit, a routine, and in some ways, it had become a part of who she was. When Kola returned home for lunch, he found the house exactly as he expected. The floors were clean, the dishes were washed, and the living room looked perfect. He nodded approvingly and said, "Good, the house is in order. Keep it this way." He didn't notice the slight pause in her movement, the tiredness in her eyes, or the small slump in her shoulders. To him it was simple, the house was clean and she had done her work. That was all that mattered. Amina smiled politely and nodded, hiding the exhaustion she felt. She did not complain. She never did. Complaining, she thought, would only cause arguments or make him feel guilty. And she didn't want that. Afternoon came and the sun grew hotter. Amina carried on with the chores even though her energy was low. She cleaned the windows, wiped the furniture, and organized the pantry. She even checked the children's school uniforms and prepared them for the next day. Each small task added to the invisible weight she carried. She paused for a moment to sit on the edge of a chair and rub her neck, feeling the fatigue in her muscles. But before she could rest fully, she remembered another task she had left undone: cooking dinner, ironing the husband's clothes, and making sure everything was ready for the evening. The list seemed endless. Kola returned home in the evening, tired from work. He dropped his bag at the door and looked around. Everything was neat. The dishes were done. The floor was spotless. He smiled and thought to himself that he had a lucky wife who kept the house running smoothly. But in his mind he also thought, she should have done more by now. He walked through the rooms, giving small instructions about what needed to be ready for tomorrow. Each instruction, each casual remark, added to the weight on Amina's shoulders. She nodded quietly, smiled, and continued with her work without protest. As the night wore on, Kola watched television and relaxed. He did not notice that Amina sat quietly in the kitchen, wiping down counters she had already cleaned twice that day. Her body was weary, and her mind felt invisible, but she pushed on. She felt her energy draining slowly, her smile fading more with every passing day. Her patience was endless, but her spirit was quietly growing tired. She loved her husband and her family, but she longed for recognition, for a moment when her effort would be seen and appreciated. But Kola rarely noticed these small things. In his mind, everything was normal. Everything was as it should be. And slowly, without realizing it, he was treating his wife like a maid in her own home. Before going to bed, Amina finally sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands were tired, her back ached, and her eyes were heavy. Kola was already asleep, snoring softly beside her, completely unaware of her exhaustion. She looked around the room at the neatly folded clothes, the polished furniture, and the clean floors, and felt a small mix of pride and sadness. She had kept the house perfect, but at what cost? Her energy was gone, her joy was hidden, and her needs were ignored. Yet she stayed quiet, not because she wanted to, but because she had learned to put others first. She had learned that in this house, her work was invisible. She whispered softly to herself, almost like a prayer, "I hope he sees me one day." Then she closed her eyes and drifted into a quiet sleep, her body tired but her heart still holding love for the family she cared for so deeply. Kola continued sleeping peacefully, unaware of the growing distance between them, unaware of the invisible weight he had placed on his wife. The next afternoon, the sun was high in the sky, casting warm light across the small town where Kola and Amina lived. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional sound of birds chirping outside. Amina had already started her usual routine. She swept the floor carefully, wiped the counters, and arranged the small table in the living room. She moved quickly and efficiently, her hands working without pause. Each task she completed added to the order and comfort of the home, but it also took a piece of her energy. Her body felt heavy and her shoulders were tense, but she ignored the discomfort. She had grown accustomed to putting everyone else first. Just as she was folding a pile of freshly washed clothes, she heard a soft knock on the door. She opened it to find her friend, Binta, standing there with a gentle smile. Binta had known Amina since they were children. She could always tell when something was wrong, even if Amina tried to hide it. Today, Binta noticed immediately that Amina looked exhausted. Her eyes were heavy, her movements slow, and there was a quiet sadness in her expression that Binta had never seen before. "Amina, you look tired," Binta said softly as she stepped inside. "Are you okay?" She glanced around the house and noticed how neat and clean everything was. "You've done all this yourself?" Binta asked, her voice filled with concern. Amina nodded quietly, smiling faintly. "It's nothing, Binta. Just the usual," she replied, trying to sound normal. But Binta could see right through her. Just then, Kola stepped outside to take care of a small errand, leaving the two women alone in the living room. Binta leaned closer to Amina and whispered, "You need rest. You can't do everything alone. It's too much." Amina's hands paused for a moment as she listened. She felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because someone finally noticed her exhaustion, and sadness because the one person who should have noticed, her husband, did not. She nodded slowly, not knowing what to say. She felt the truth in Binta's words. She had been carrying the weight of the house and family on her shoulders for months, and it was finally catching up with her. Binta stayed a little while, chatting gently about lighter things and trying to make Amina laugh. She reminded Amina of the importance of resting and even suggested that she ask Kola to help more around the house. Amina nodded but didn't say anything. She loved Kola, and she didn't want to upset him or start an argument. She promised herself silently that she would try someday to ask him for help. After Binta left, the house felt quiet again. Amina continued with her tasks, but her movements were slower, and she often paused to rub her tired shoulders or back. She thought about Binta's advice and realized that she had been ignoring her own needs for too long. She had always believed that managing the home, caring for Kola, and keeping everything in order was her responsibility alone. But now, seeing her own exhaustion reflected in Binta's concerned eyes, she realized that she deserved care too. Later that evening, Kola returned from work. The house was neat as always, the floors spotless, the dishes clean and the laundry folded. He did not notice the small signs of Amina's fatigue, the slight slump in her shoulders, the faint shadows under her eyes, the quiet sighs as she moved from one task to another. He only saw that everything was perfect and thought to himself that she had done an excellent job. After dinner they both sat quietly in the living room. Amina tried to speak about a small thing she wanted Kola to help with, but he was distracted by his phone and the news updates. He nodded absent-mindedly as she spoke, giving her attention in words but not in action. She smiled faintly, hiding the frustration and weariness that had been building inside her all day. Kola didn't realize that his lack of attention, his assumptions, and his casual demands were slowly making her feel invisible. As night fell, Amina finally went to the bedroom. She sat quietly on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. She felt exhausted, too tired even to speak. Her body was heavy from all the work of the day, but it was the quiet weight in her heart that felt even heavier. She thought about Binta's words earlier in the afternoon. "You need rest. You are doing everything alone." Those words echoed in her mind. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel that her work was too much for one person. Kola noticed her sitting there and paused for a moment. He saw the way her eyes were slightly red, the faint droop of her shoulders and the stillness in her movements. For the first time that day he felt a small pinch of guilt. Something in him told him that perhaps he had been too focused on his work and too careless in noticing the effort she put into the house. But just as quickly as the feeling came he pushed it away. He told himself that everything would be normal tomorrow. That she was fine. That he was the hard-working one and she had her role to play. The guilt did not last long, and he soon returned to his usual routine, thinking little of the quiet moment he had just witnessed. Amina stayed on the bed, staring at the ceiling for a few minutes, thinking about the day. She had worked hard, kept the house clean, cooked meals and cared for the family, yet no one seemed to see the effort she put in. She had grown used to being silent, to keeping her feelings hidden, and to putting everyone else first. But today, with Binta's visit, she realized that being invisible was not normal. It hurt even if she tried not to let it show. As the night wore on, Amina reflected quietly on her life. She thought about how long she had been doing everything for Kola and the home without asking for help. She thought about the long mornings of cooking and cleaning, the afternoons of washing and folding clothes, the evenings spent preparing for the next day. She remembered the small moments when Kola would casually give instructions or remind her of tasks, and she realized that even though she loved him, the weight she carried was heavy. She thought about Binta's words again. "You need rest. You are doing everything alone." She realized that it was not just advice, it was a warning. She needed to take care of herself and she needed Kola to notice, to share responsibilities, to be a partner rather than only a provider. She did not want to argue or complain, but she wished for recognition, for care, for understanding. Meanwhile, Kola lay in bed, scrolling through his phone. He did not know the thoughts running through Amina's mind. He did not notice how tired she was, how much her body ached, or how her heart longed for him to see her. He felt satisfied that the house looked perfect, that everything was in order, and that he had done his part at work. He had no idea that Amina's quiet sadness was growing, one day at a time, under the surface of a perfectly arranged home. Amina finally closed her eyes, feeling the weight of exhaustion in her limbs. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Tomorrow, maybe tomorrow things will be different." She hoped that someday Kola would notice, that someday he would see her as more than someone who kept the house clean. She hoped that someday he would understand the effort she put in, and the love that carried her through all the work she did without complaint. The night was still and quiet. The next weekend, the sky was pale, and the sunlight filtered softly through the windows of Kola and Amina's home. It was a day that seemed ordinary at first, but for Amina, it quickly became one of the hardest she had faced in weeks. From the moment she woke up, her body felt heavy, as if all the weight of the week had settled on her shoulders. Her limbs ached, her head felt dizzy, and even the simplest movements required effort. She had tried to push through her exhaustion as she always did, but that morning it was different. She had to lie down. She rested on the couch, pulling a light blanket over herself. Her eyes were closed, but her mind was not quiet. She could feel the dull ache in her back and the tension in her shoulders. She thought about the meals she had cooked all week, the dishes she had washed, the laundry she had folded, and the cleaning she had done. She had done all of it quietly, without complaint, without expecting anything in return. And yet, the fatigue had caught up with her, demanding her attention in a way that could not be ignored. Kola woke up later than usual, feeling rested after a long week at the office. He stretched and yawned, expecting the house to be in order as it usually was. He walked into the kitchen to make a cup of tea and looked around. At first, everything seemed normal. The floor was clean, the counters were tidy, and the clothes were neatly folded. He expected Amina to be moving around as usual, perhaps preparing breakfast or arranging the living room. But when he looked closer, he noticed that she was not there. He walked to the living room and saw her lying on the couch, her pale face turned toward the window. Her eyes were closed, and she looked smaller than usual, as if the house itself had swallowed some of her energy. Kola froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. He had never seen her like this before. She had always managed everything with strength and grace, but today she looked fragile. "Amina?" he called softly. She opened her eyes slowly and forced a faint smile. "I'm fine," she said weakly. But Kola could see that she was not fine. The color in her cheeks was gone, replaced by a pale tone that spoke of exhaustion. Her hands, normally busy with tasks, rested limply on her lap. The quiet in the house felt heavier than usual, and Kola suddenly realized that this was not normal. He tried to help her sit up, but she shook her head gently. "No, Kola. I just need to rest," she said. He nodded, a little unsure, and moved to the kitchen. He looked around the counters and noticed that breakfast had not been prepared, that the dishes from last night had not been washed, and that the floor needed sweeping. A small feeling of panic began to rise inside him. Without Amina's usual guidance, he did not know where to start. He washed the dishes carefully, realizing that even this small task required attention and patience. Then he tried to sweep the floor, but he kept missing spots, stepping on small crumbs and making little mistakes. The mop he picked up seemed heavier than usual, and the water spilled onto the floor more than once. He paused and sighed, wiping sweat from his forehead. He had never understood how much effort Amina put into keeping the house clean and organized. After cleaning the dishes and the floor, he moved to the cooking. He had planned to make a simple meal, but he soon realized that he did not know where everything was stored. The spices, the vegetables, the cooking utensils, all of them required a knowledge that Amina had accumulated over years of managing the home. He searched through cabinets, knocking over a few containers, and accidentally spilled some flour onto the floor. For the first time, he understood how organized and careful Amina had to be every day. As he tried to prepare lunch, he realized he had forgotten to thaw some meat, and the vegetables were not washed. He tried to chop them carefully, but his fingers kept slipping. The smell of burning food filled the kitchen as he left the stove unattended for a moment. The sound of smoke alarms startled him, and he quickly turned off the stove, breathing heavily. Amina watched quietly from the couch, too weak to move, but a small part of her felt relieved that Kola was seeing, even briefly, how much she did every day. By afternoon, Kola was exhausted. His arms ached from cleaning, his back hurt from bending and lifting, and he felt frustrated at every small mistake. He had always believed that Amina's work was simple, easy, and natural, but now he realized that it required effort, patience, and attention at every moment. The house, which had always seemed orderly, was actually a constant challenge. Kola's respect for his wife grew with every task he struggled to complete. He paused for a moment and looked at Amina. She had closed her eyes again, and her breathing was steady. She seemed peaceful, almost resigned, but he could see the faint lines of exhaustion in her face. A wave of guilt washed over him. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that he had been relying on her too heavily, that he had treated her like a servant rather than an equal partner. His words from previous weeks, his casual instructions, his expectations, all of it weighed heavily on him now. He sat down beside her, feeling a strange mix of regret and realization. "Amina," he said softly, I didn't understand before. I see now how much you do every single day. I didn't realize how hard it is to manage everything alone." She opened her eyes slowly, looking at him. He could see the surprise there, mixed with cautious hope. I'm sorry," he added. "I've been wrong. I've been treating you like you were a maid in your own home. And you're not. You're my wife, my partner, and I didn't treat you that way." Amina looked at him quietly. She wanted to say more, but her voice was weak. Instead, she nodded slightly, letting him speak, letting him acknowledge the truth she had lived with silently for so long. Kola reached for a small blanket and carefully covered her, realizing for the first time how much care she deserved, not just in words but in actions. After a few moments of silence, Kola attempted to continue managing the house. He washed the remaining dishes, folded clothes, and even attempted to prepare a small snack. Though his efforts were clumsy and slow, he felt a sense of connection with Amina's daily work that he had never experienced before. He realized that the home was not just a place, It was a constant effort of love, attention, and care, mostly provided by her all these years. By evening, the house was quiet again. Amina rested on the couch, her body still weak, but her heart felt a little lighter. Kola sat nearby, exhausted but grateful for the lesson he had learned. He understood that managing a home was not simple, that every small task Amina did required thought, effort, and patience. He realized that he could no longer take her for granted, that respect and partnership were more important than convenience or habit. That night, Kola and Amina sat together quietly. He held her hand gently, feeling the warmth and care he had often overlooked. He apologized again, softly, sincerely, and promised to change. Amina rested her head on his shoulder, too tired to speak, but her heart felt a quiet hope. Finally, for the first time in a long while, Kola understood the weight she had carried silently, and he promised to be part of that burden instead of adding to it. For the first time, the home felt balanced. That evening, the house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional sound of a car passing by outside. The sun had gone down, leaving a soft orange glow in the sky that slowly faded into the darkness of night. Inside, Amina sat on the edge of the couch, her head slightly bowed, her hands folded in her lap. She was tired, but for the first time that day she felt a small sense of relief. Her body ached, her limbs were sore, and her heart was heavy from weeks of exhaustion, but something had shifted. Kola was beside her now, and she could feel a different energy in the room. Kola sat down slowly, careful not to make sudden movements. He had spent the day helping around the house, washing dishes, folding clothes, and even attempting to cook a small meal. Every task had been more difficult than he expected, and every small mistake reminded him of the work Amina had been doing for months, even years. He was tired, yes, but the exhaustion carried with it a deep sense of understanding and, for the first time, real respect. His hand reached for hers gently. Amina looked up and met his eyes. She saw something different there, a mixture of regret, realization, and sincerity. His eyes were soft, not filled with impatience or expectation like they often had been. Kola took a deep breath, and his voice was soft and shaky as he began to speak. "Amina," he said quietly, I have been wrong." His words were deliberate, slow, as if he wanted every syllable to carry meaning. He continued, "I've treated you unfairly. I've expected you to do everything for this house, for the children, for me, and I never really saw how hard it was for you. I didn't see what you were doing every day." He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. Amina stayed quiet, listening. She had expected this day to come eventually, but she didn't know when or how. She didn't want anger, she didn't want arguments. She wanted balance, respect, and understanding. Her heart had been heavy with exhaustion and sadness for weeks, but she had continued quietly, because she loved Kola and their family. Now, as she listened to him speak, she felt a small spark of hope that things could change. "I know I have been treating you like you were just a maid in this house," Kola continued, his voice almost breaking. "And you're not. You are my wife, my partner, my equal. I've been selfish and I didn't notice how much you were carrying. I see it now. I finally understand and I am sorry." He squeezed her hand gently, as if to emphasize the sincerity of his words. Amina felt tears forming in her eyes, not from anger, but from a mix of relief and quiet gratitude. She had longed for him to see her, to truly notice the weight she carried, and finally, he was acknowledging it. She nodded slightly, not saying much, letting him speak, letting him take the first step toward change. For so long she had been quiet, holding in her feelings to avoid conflict or disappointment. Now, it felt as though the walls she had built around her heart were slowly being understood and respected. Kola's gaze softened as he looked at her. He noticed the small details he had overlooked before, the faint lines under her eyes, the small slump in her shoulders, the pale tone of her skin after a long day of work. Each detail reminded him of the countless days he had taken her effort for granted. "I don't want to see you tired like this anymore," he said gently. "I want us to share this life together. I will help more, I will listen, and I will respect your work, your energy, your time." Amina's lips curved into a small, weary smile. It was the first smile of the day that carried a genuine feeling of relief. She had wanted recognition, not as praise, but as acknowledgement of her hard work and care. Kola's words were a start, a small, meaningful start toward balance and partnership. He continued, speaking slowly, his voice steady now despite the emotion. "I want us to be a team. I don't want you to carry everything on your shoulders. I will wake up earlier to help, I will cook sometimes, I will wash the dishes. I will make sure you rest. I see you now, Amina. I really see you. Amina felt a warmth in her chest. She had been carrying so much silently that it almost felt strange to have it noticed. Her eyes watered slightly and she blinked to hide the tears, but Kola saw them and did not look away. Instead, he leaned closer, brushing a small strand of hair from her face, a gesture that had always been gentle and loving, but now felt filled with new meaning. "I understand now," he said softly. "I understand that keeping this house clean and organized is not easy. Preparing meals, doing laundry, making sure the children are taken care of, it's hard work. I thought it was simple. I thought it was something anyone could do. But it's not simple. It requires patience, energy, and love. And you've been giving it all, every single day. I've been blind to it and I am sorry." Amina listened quietly. She wanted to speak, to tell him how long she had waited for this acknowledgement, how long she had dreamed of hearing these words. But her voice was weak from exhaustion, and she felt it was enough to just sit there, letting him speak, letting him finally recognize her efforts. For the first time in a long while, the house felt lighter. It was not because the cleaning was done or the meals were ready, it was because the weight in their relationship, the invisible burden she had carried for months, was finally being acknowledged. Kola's apology was not just words, it was a recognition of her humanity, her value, and her partnership in their home. He reached for her hands again, holding them with both of his now. "I will not make the same mistakes," he promised. "I will be here with you, helping you. We will share this life together. I see you, Amina, and I respect you. I love you." Amina finally spoke, her voice soft and tired, but full of quiet relief. "Thank you, Kola. I just wanted to be seen. That's all." She smiled faintly, letting the tension in her body ease just a little. She had been carrying so much silently that finally being seen felt like a small, gentle healing. They sat together for a long while, holding hands in silence. The house around them seemed peaceful, as if it understood the shift that had just happened. Kola felt a deep sense of responsibility now, but also a quiet determination. He understood that words alone would not be enough. He had to act, to change, to truly be a partner in every way. Amina leaned her head on his shoulder, tired but feeling safe. She had wanted this acknowledgement for so long, and now that it was here, she felt hope. Hope that their home could be a place of balance, respect, and care. Hope that Kola would not just say he understood, but that he would show it every day. For the first time in weeks, she felt a lightness in her chest, a sense of being seen and valued. She had loved Kola, but her love had been quiet, almost hidden beneath the weight of daily chores. Now, with his apology and promise to change, she felt that her effort, her care, and her love mattered. Kola, too, felt something shift within him. He realized that his previous attitude had not only hurt Amina but had also affected the warmth and balance of their home. He felt regret for the way he had acted, but he also felt determination to do better. He would not take her for granted again. He would not ignore her work or her feelings. He would stand beside her, sharing the responsibilities and the love. Days passed quietly at first, and slowly, small changes began to appear in the home of Kola and Amina. The house felt different now, not because the furniture or floors had changed, but because the energy inside the rooms had shifted. There was a lightness, a warmth, a sense of partnership that had been missing before. Kola had taken his promise seriously. He had understood that being a husband meant more than providing money, it meant sharing life, sharing effort, and valuing the person he loved. The mornings began differently now. Kola woke up earlier than usual, sometimes even before Amina, and would start by preparing simple breakfast items. He wasn't perfect at first. The toast sometimes burned, the eggs were slightly overcooked, and he occasionally forgot to boil water for tea. But he tried, and his effort was sincere. Amina watched quietly at first, a small smile forming on her face. She didn't interrupt him or correct him too quickly. She let him learn, just as she had learned all the routines of managing the home over the years. After breakfast, Kola would sweep the floor, wash a few dishes, or fold the laundry. The house no longer felt like a place where all the burden rested on Amina's shoulders. She could see his determination and effort, and it filled her with quiet joy. Slowly she began to regain her energy. Her hands no longer ached constantly, her back no longer felt tense, and her heart began to feel lighter. Amina noticed that Kola would sometimes pause in the middle of a task and look around, realizing how much she had done every day. Sometimes he would laugh softly at a small mistake he made, like spilling water while washing the floor or breaking a plate while trying to arrange the kitchen. Each small moment reminded him of how much effort Amina had invested silently in keeping the home running. The children also noticed the change. They saw their father helping in ways they had never seen before, smiling as he prepared a snack, sweeping crumbs from the floor, or playing a small game with them while folding clothes. Kola was no longer distant and distracted. He was present, participating in the life of the home. The children's laughter filled the rooms more than it had in weeks, and Amina felt her heart lift every time she saw the smiles around her. Kola learned to be patient. He realized that keeping a home in order was not simple. He learned that meals required planning, laundry required care, and cleaning required attention. But most importantly, he learned that sharing these tasks was not a burden. It was an act of love and respect. He understood that the home did not belong to one person alone. It belonged to both of them equally. Each evening, Kola would take time to sit with Amina and ask if she needed help with anything. He would thank her for the things she did, even the smallest ones like arranging the pillows on the couch or making sure the children had clean uniforms. His words were sincere, and over time they became a habit. Amina felt seen and appreciated not just for one day but for every day that passed. She no longer had to carry the invisible weight alone. One Saturday, Amina found herself smiling as she prepared a small snack for them. Kola had offered to cook lunch and she had taken a seat, letting him work in the kitchen. She watched as he struggled a little with chopping vegetables but kept going, laughing at his own mistakes and showing patience with himself. It reminded her of the times when she had been learning these tasks herself, and she felt a gentle warmth in her heart. She reached out and touched his shoulder softly. "Thank you for helping," she said quietly. Kola smiled, a little embarrassed but happy. "I should have done this sooner," he said. "I'm glad I finally understand." As the days went by, small routines formed. Kola would cook, clean, and sometimes even do laundry while Amina rested. They shared tasks more evenly and life felt lighter. The house no longer felt heavy with exhaustion and invisible work. It felt warm, lively, and full of care. Kola realized that love alone was not enough. It required action. Caring for someone meant sharing the weight, noticing the effort, and stepping in before it became too much. One afternoon, Amina paused while arranging the living room. She looked at Kola, who was folding a pile of laundry nearby. She realized how much had changed in just a few days. He was not perfect, but he was sincere. He had learned to notice, to care, and to help. The small mistakes he made did not matter. It was the effort, the intention, and the partnership that counted. Her heart felt lighter than it had in months, and she smiled quietly to herself. Kola noticed her smile and felt a sense of pride and relief. He had feared that he had been too late, that he had ignored her for too long. But now he understood that it was never too late to change, to learn, and to show love through action. He felt grateful for the realization that had come after weeks of ignorance and oversight. He had learned a deep lesson. A home was not built by one person alone. It required two hearts, two hands, and two minds working together. Evenings became moments of connection. Kola and Amina would sit together after the children had gone to bed, talking quietly about their day, sharing small stories and laughing at little mishaps. Kola made it a habit to ask Amina about her needs, her feelings, and her thoughts. She began to speak more freely, no longer hiding her exhaustion or suppressing her feelings. Kola listened attentively, showing patience, care, and genuine interest. The warmth in the home grew stronger. The rooms that had felt heavy with fatigue and silent effort now felt light and welcoming. The kitchen, once a place of endless work for Amina alone, became a shared space where laughter and learning occurred. The living room, once quiet and tense, became a place of joy and togetherness. Kola's change had not only helped Amina, but it had also transformed the atmosphere of the entire home. One morning, as Amina prepared breakfast, she looked at Kola helping their youngest child with schoolwork. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. She realized that the weight she had carried silently for so long had finally been shared. She no longer felt invisible or burdened. Her heart felt light, her spirit renewed, and her energy slowly returning. She smiled to herself, whispering a quiet thanks for the change that had come into their lives. Kola, too, felt a transformation within himself. He had learned humility, patience, and respect. He had realized that true partnership meant noticing, helping, and caring. He felt a deep gratitude for the opportunity to change before it was too late. He understood that the home was not just about clean floors, cooked meals, or organized spaces. It was about love, care, respect, and shared responsibility. As days turned into weeks, their relationship grew stronger. Amina no longer felt worn out and Kola no longer felt disconnected. The home had become a place of warmth, laughter, and balance. They shared responsibilities, supported each other, and celebrated small victories together. The partnership they had built transformed not just their home, but their hearts as well. Kola often reflected on the lessons he had learned. He realized that it was easy to take someone for granted, to overlook effort, and to assume that love alone was enough. But he had seen how small gestures, shared responsibilities, and genuine appreciation could transform a home. He was grateful for the opportunity to learn this lesson before it was too late, before the invisible weight had caused irreparable damage. Amina noticed the change in him every day. She felt seen, appreciated, and loved in ways she hadn't before. She laughed more freely, rested when she needed, and participated in the household with renewed energy. The home was no longer a place of silent labor but a place of shared joy, warmth, and care. Kola's gratitude deepened as he watched Amina regain her strength and joy. He realized that a home was not about one person working hard while the other relaxed. It was about two people building life together. He promised himself that he would never forget this lesson and that he would continue to share the load, appreciate Amina, and care for her as a partner, not as someone taking care of a house alone. The sunlight streamed through the windows one morning, and the house felt alive with energy. Children laughed as they played, Amina moved freely around the kitchen, and Kola assisted wherever he could. The home had become a place of balance, respect, and warmth. Every small act of care, every shared task, every word of gratitude had transformed their lives. Kola looked at Amina and smiled. He realized that he had learned one of the most important lessons of his life. A home is built by two hearts working together, never by making one person carry the entire load. He felt grateful that he had understood it before it was too late, before the invisible weight had caused lasting damage. For the first time in a long while, he felt that the love, respect, and partnership they shared would last a lifetime. Amina smiled back at him, her heart full of warmth. Together, they knew that their home was no longer a place of silent effort and unseen work. It was a home filled with care, partnership, and love. And as they moved through each day helping each other, laughing, and sharing small moments, they understood that the true strength of a home was not in one person's labor, but in the hearts and hands of both working together.